This meeting of the Honorable Senate for Friday, November the 1st, 2024 is called to order. Before we begin the business of the day, we have a lovely group of 35 young students from the Head Start Prep School. I believe it's in St. Mary, is that correct? So, no, St. Mary. Portmore, St. Catherine. Portmore, well, hello. Nice to see you all. There. Even though you are not from St. Mary, you are very welcome. And you're joined, I believe, by 5 teachers. Could you stand, please, teachers, so we can see you? Oh, much more than 5. Well, you certainly you certainly have your hands full, teachers. We know that the kids are here by virtue, no doubt, of your intervention. And so we want to welcome both yourselves and the kids. Welcome to Garden House. And thank you for making a decision to bring these children here today. It's a pleasure for us to have you. And anytime at all you want to come and visit again, you can. And there are tours available if you get in touch with the same people that you got in touch with to be here today. There are tours available at any time that you want to come back. So welcome again. And the only thing I would ask is that when you leave, you ensure that your transportation drive carefully with the kids going over. Thank you again for joining us. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: annual report and audited financial statements of the Company's Office of Jamaica for the financial years 2016-2017 and 2017-2018. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Registrar General's Department for the financial year 2021-2022. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Broadcasting Commission for the financial year 2023-2024. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Fair Trading Commission for the financial years 2016-2017 and 2017-2018. Annual report of the Office of Utilities Regulation for the financial year 2023-2024 and its related ministry paper numbered 77 of 2024. Annual report of the Management Institute for National Development for the financial year 2023-2024 and its related ministry paper numbered 78 of 2024. Auditor General's Department examination of the components of the fiscal policy paper for the financial year 2024-2025 interim report. Indicom quarterly report for quarter 4 of 2023, October to December 2023, quarter 1 of 2024, January to March 2024, and quarter 2 of 2024, April to June 2024. The Auditors General Department's certified appropriation accounts, head 19,000, recurrent, with respect to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation for the year 2021-2022. The Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, Volume 147, dated October 25, 2024, number 408, enclosing the Constitution of Jamaica. The Jamaica Gazette Supplement, Proclamations, Rules and Regulations, 2575, Volume 147, dated Friday, October 25, 2024, number 409, enclosing the emergency powers, specified areas in the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew, Regulations 2024, under the Emergency Powers Act.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Just before we move on to the next item, Senator Scott Motley has the permission of the chair to sit in a seat other than her own. And Senator Dr. Morris Dixon has our congratulations on your, I don't know, I have to be very careful, the additional responsibilities that you have been given. And I think I speak for all the Senate when I say that we are sure that the enthusiasm and competence with which you approach your previous responsibility, if that is continued into this new development, this new responsibility, we are sure that the country will benefit, and in particular the young persons who so much is dependent on. So congratulations, and yes, I think that you can go forward with the understanding that you have the support and best wishes of both members, both sides of the Senate. And I'd give you an opportunity to say a word if you wish.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank you, colleagues, for your warm words of congratulations. And I know for me, education is really the key to unlocking the growth and development we want in our country. And I think we all agree on that. And every single one of us in this room has been the beneficiary of our education system in Jamaica. We've gotten the best of it, and that's why we are here. And my goal, and I know this, my goal is really to ensure that every child is able to receive the same level of education that all of us in this room was able to get. There is way too much disparity, and our children in this country deserve a Ministry of Education that provides for them, and that's what I will work tirelessly towards, Mr. President. And I thank our Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, for appointing me into this new role and having confidence in me. And I look forward to the support of everyone on both sides and all stakeholders, because this is not something that can be addressed by one individual or one ministry. It's actually a national initiative. And I'm so happy this morning, Mr. President, to have the students here too, who I got a chance to speak to earlier, because when you look at their faces, that's the reason we are doing what we are doing, because we want to leave Jamaica in a much better place for them to reach their full potential. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. Petitions? Papers? Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Bills, I'm sorry, I know after announcement, bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives, and I neglected that. I'm so sorry. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I have the honor to advise the Honorable Senate that on the 29th day of October 2024, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Trade Act was passed in the House of Representatives without amendment.
Minister?
I have the honor, Mr. President. I have the honor to advise the Honorable House, the Honorable Senate rather, that on the 29th day of October 2024, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Trade Act was passed in the House of Representatives without amendment. Wait a minute.
Yeah, don't be distracted by Senator Fraser Benn. She is feeling a bit frisky today.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of, I'm sorry, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill, Mr. President.
A bill shortly entitled the Trade Amendment Act 2024 read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bill. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take second reading of the bill and to take it through all its concluding stages.
Thank you very much, Minister. Petitions? I'm sorry?
This is, Mr. President, at the last sitting of the House again, the Senate, you gave your consent for the House of Representatives amendments to a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Registration and Regulation of Companies that Operate and Maintain Segregated Accounts and Incorporated Segregated Accounts, and for the connected matters to be considered and approved.
I think the debate had started, and we are
It was.
determined that we will continue. So we'll continue. Yes.
Well, we don't have to have a debate, Mr. The amendments were circulated, and so we ask that they now be approved. Straightforward.
Mr. President. I want to thank you for having given us the opportunity to examine and understand what amendments had come from the House. We have done so, and we certainly don't, having the legislation having started in the Senate and a debate having ensued when that bill was tabled, we do not think that there is anything in the amendments which would require us to detain the Senate any further. And therefore, we support the minister.
Thank you very much. What had happened is that there were some members who had indicated that they had not seen the amendments, and that's why it was not closed at that time. So you're asking for...
I'm asking that the amendments be approved. Accepted, actually.
The question put by the minister is that the relevant amendments be accepted and approved. Those in favor? Against?
Through the agenda, and then after public business.
It's just, Senator Morris, it's just...
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, I'm of the view, and I'm informed accordingly that this is the right place to do it, because you're not going into another debate, you're just accepting it.
But it's a substantive legislation. It's a bill with changes, so it has to go through the necessary procedures. And I urge you, Mr. President.
Yeah, it was already passed in the Senate, you know, Senator Morris. So it's just the amendment that you're looking at.
Yes, all matters that come here, Minister, are subject to debate. You know.
Okay, I've heard you, Senator Morris. So I'm going to put the question that whether or not the proposed amendments be accepted. Those in favor? Against? Thank you very much. Petitions? Papers? Reports from committees? Notices of motions given orally? Senator Gabriel Morris.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move. Whereas the well-being of Jamaica's youth is of paramount importance, and non-communicable diseases, NCDs, pose a significant public health challenge, with 1 in 3 Jamaicans having hypertension and 1 in 8 suffering from diabetes. And whereas in 2017, Over 30,000 children aged 10 to 19 were found to be hypertensive, and the rising levels of obesity affecting 20% of boys and 26.4% of girls aged 13 to 17 highlight the need for urgent action. And whereas the World Health Organization recognizes school food policies as a proven intervention to reduce NCD risk by fostering healthy eating habits in children, and whereas since 2021, the Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network and other youth organizations have advocated for the finalization and implementation of the school nutrition policy to create a healthier food environment for students, with a green paper presented in May 2022, followed by stakeholder consultations in September 2022. And whereas more than 3/4 of students in Jamaica rely on school canteens or vendors for their meals, exposing them to unhealthy food options due to the absence of formal regulations. And whereas there have been no significant updates or progress on the SNP since the last consultations in September 2022, leaving our youth vulnerable to unhealthy food environments that contribute to rising levels of obesity and other diet-related conditions. And whereas the failure to implement these critical health interventions stands to cost the Jamaican economy an estimated $77 billion between 2017 and 2032 due to the impact of NCDs. And whereas there is a pressing need for comprehensive regulations, including the ban on unhealthy foods and beverages, the development of school food gardens, and the incorporation of physical activity and nutrition education into the curriculum as proposed in the SNP. Be it resolved that this Honorable House calls upon the Ministry of Education and Youth and the Ministry of Health and Wellness to expedite the finalization and implementation of the school nutrition policy by the end of the current academic year, with execution beginning before the start of the 2025 to 2026 school year. Be it further resolved that the government establishes clear timelines for the regulation of unhealthy food and beverage sales and marketing within school environments, as well as the provision of healthy, locally sourced food options to support both students' health and local agriculture. And be it further resolved that this Honorable Senate mandates the inclusion of youth in the monitoring and evaluation process of the school nutrition policy to ensure transparency and accountability in its implementation, safeguarding the health and future of Jamaica's children.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Questions and answers. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions, can't hear me? Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to indicate that the matters which are before us today, of course, the first matter on the agenda is the Fiscal Services Amendment Act, which was tabled 2 weeks ago. Sorry, the Financial Services Commission Act, which was tabled 2 weeks ago. And then we will proceed with the Trade Amendment Act, which for which the relevant motion will be taken by Minister Hill. Both bills, in fact, will be piloted by Senator Hill, and it is therefore anticipated that we will be efficient with our time and do our very best to ensure that this important business is completed within reasonable time. I thank you, Mr. President, for your understanding, and also just ask for the record, with your leave, to be able to place on record my unfailing and support and confidence in the abilities of Senator Dana Morris Dixon to
really effectively undertake her additional responsibilities together with those with which she was already conferred, and to wish her every best and every success in this new portfolio. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Hill?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Financial Services Commission Amendment Act of 2024, the businesses that operate in this sector are particularly dependent on a robust and efficient and effective education ministry. So I too add my serious and hearty thank you and committed congratulations to Senator, now Minister of Education and Youth, and as she takes on, with all the youth and strength that she has, this really powerful and vital industry, rather ministry. It is an industry actually, but a ministry. It is, except for the Ministry of Education, the ministry with the biggest budget, and one could contend that the biggest operating budget, because much of what the Ministry of Finance handles, those are for interest payments and debt, and probably their operating budget is about $50 billion. Well, Minister Morris Dixon's is $163 billion. It's a lot, and we wish her, I certainly wish her every success as she takes on this new. The financial, as a background, Mr. President, the financial crisis experienced by Jamaica in the 1990s, the collapse of the CL Financial Limited, the holding company of Colonial Life Insurance Company, CLICO, Trinidad, and the recent global economic crisis of 2007 highlighted, that's a Lehman Brothers meltdown, highlighted the significant risks that financial groups can pose to the growth and stability of both global and local economies. These crises expose situations in which regulatory supervisory regimes did not fully identify or mitigate the risks and the potential adverse systemic impact associated with complex group structures. Those have been identified, and we know how painful they can be. Due to their economic reach across sectors and jurisdictions, financial groups present huge challenges for supervisory oversight. In order to rectify these regulatory deficiencies, the Joint Forum, comprised of representatives from the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, BCSBS, that's BCBS rather, the International Organization of Securities Commission, IOSCO, and the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, AIS, jointly published the principles for the supervision of financial conglomerates in 2012. Additionally, international regulatory bodies such as the IAIS recommend that regulators establish group-wide supervision framework. Group-wide is important. Group-wide supervision is reputed to provide greater insight into the affairs and financial conditions of financial groups and therefore international standard-setting bodies. The International Monetary Fund and the Financial Stability Board are requiring all regulators to develop and implement such frameworks. Further, Mr. President, Jamaica underwent a mutual evaluation with the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF, and several deficiencies were identified, which included lack of consolidated supervision of non-deposit taking groups in Jamaica, Mutual Evaluation Report 2017. I'm pleased to remind this august body, the Senate, that after our last collaboration and discussion and review by FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, emanated from the OECD, Jamaica came out with really flying colors, and so much so that after the Secretariat of FATF looked at what we did, they said that what we have done can become a model for other countries who are on the gray list, which we were, or the blacklist that some are. It is widely documented and accepted that sole supervision, the supervision of a financial institution by its regulator on a standalone basis, not taking into consideration the influence, interactions, and impact of the group's activities and decisions, is not sufficient to protect users of the financial market when that financial institution is a member of a group. While there are benefits to a prescribed financial institution, Mr. President, from having group membership, there are significant risks to the viability of the prescribed financial institution and, by extension, the wider financial market. Mr. President, as such, this bill, the Financial Services Commission Amendment Act, seeks to enhance the regulatory framework for effective and comprehensive group-wide supervision of non-deposit-taking groups. The amendments to the Financial Services Commission Act, FSCA, consequential amendments to the pensions, superannuation funds and retirement schemes, insurance and securities acts will further empower the Financial Services Commission to conduct group-wide supervision and the promulgation of a new set of regulations to govern the FSC's group-wide supervisory framework. So, provisions of the bill, Mr. President. Clause 2. The clause contains the amendment to Section 2 of the Principal Act to include a definition of important terms such as global group, group-wide supervision, and prescribed financial group. It should be noted that subsequent to the recommendations by industry stakeholders, amendments to Clause 2 were moved and passed in the House of Representatives. The amendments are as follows. Roman numeral 1, in subclause B, delete the term relevant activity and the definition and substitute thereof the following. Relevant activity includes A, the provision of banking, insurance, money management, cambio operations, and remittance services. B, dealing in securities. C, provision of investment or investment advice. And D, the provision of trust and corporate services. Subsection 2, in subclause E, insert next after the definition of significant owner the following definition. Substantial shareholding means the ownership of 20% or more of the shares in A. Clause 3, Mr. President, amends, sorry again? 20%. Or 1. 20% is right there. So Clause 3, Mr. President, amends Section 6 of the Principal Act, which sets out the general functions of the Commission to empower the FSC to carry out effective group-wide supervision, including regulating and supervising prescribed holding companies for non-deposit-taking institutions. This is important. We're not talking about DTIs here. DTIs usually include banking institutions, but non-DTIs, non-deposit-taking institutions. For example, Mr. President, the Commission may require a prescribed holding company or a company within a prescribed financial group to provide information to A, whether any company within prescribed financial group is obtaining financing or any other direct or indirect benefit from the prescribed holding company or from any other company within the group, or B, any risk of exposure to any company within a prescribed financial group which arises from the operations of any other company within the group or from the operations of the prescribed holding company. The amendment also seeks to empower Broadly, Mr. President, very quickly and from my own experience, you want to make sure that a bank holding company is not downloading lots of loans to a much weaker subsidiary that they own or a company which they have an interest, a shareholding interest, because that company, weakness in that company could affect the stability of the bank, which has depositors' money. The amendment also seeks to empower Commission to issue directions or guidelines to a prescribed holding company or any company within a prescribed financial group. It should be noted that amendments were moved and passed in the House of Representatives to Clause 3. These amendments, Mr. President, were necessary as they were inadvertently omitted from the bill and that was originally tabled. The amendments are as follows. Roman numeral 1, the subsection 2C, insert immediately after the word group the words or a prescribed financial institution. Roman numeral 2, insert next after subsection 2D the following. 2E, a company within a prescribed financial group or a prescribed financial institution, Mr. President, that fails to comply with any direction or guideline issued by the Commission pursuant to subsection 2C commits an offense and is liable, Mr. President, on summary conviction in a parish court to a fine not exceeding $3 million. Clause 5, Mr. President, inserts new sections 8A and 8B to include provisions in relation to the insolvency, winding up, and reconstruction of prescribed holding companies. A prescribed holding company that conditions subject to remedial action may be required by the Commission to give an undertaking to take such corrective action as may be agreed between the prescribed holding company and the Commission, and Mr. President, or may be issued a cease and desist order by the Commission. Clause 6, Mr. President, inserts new sections 14A to 14M pertaining to the licensing and supervision of prescribed holding companies. The section includes fit and proper criteria for the prescribed holding companies to satisfy. This we're used to, Mr. President. It is imperative that the directors, managers of such institutions satisfy the requirements as the financial soundness of any prescribed holding company can be eroded if the persons controlling or managing the prescribed holding companies do not have the requisite experience, skill, and integrity. You don't want, Mr. President, directors of a DTI or a non-DTI company with substantial financial resources and managing other people's money to be able to download loans to companies in which they have an interest, and therefore this fit and proper requirement is well known and is necessary in this new amendment. The first provision under Section 14A requires that the prescribed financial institution and any company associated with it, Mr. President, shall be controlled by a prescribed holding company. In order to operate as a prescribed holding company, a company shall apply to the Commission for a license. It also stipulates the requirement for applications, including the form set out in the 5th schedule and the application fee prescribed by the Commission. Section 14C, Mr. President, includes provisions which set out the requirements for consideration by the FSC to grant or refuse an application for a license. Section 14H details the circumstances under which the Commission may suspend the license of a prescribed holding company. Mr. President, some of the circumstances under which the Commission may do so include where a prescribed holding company, A, no longer satisfies the conditions governing the grant of the license, or B, Mr. President, has breached any of the terms or conditions of the license, or C, has failed to pay the annual licensing fee. Section 49, Mr. President, sets out the provisions for which the Commission may revoke the license of a prescribed holding company. A license can be revoked where A, the prescribed holding company has failed to comply with the provisions of this Act or regulations made under this Act, or, Mr. President, B, the application for a license made by the prescribed holding company contained false or misleading information in a material particular, or C, the prescribed holding company failed to remedy a breach which gave rise to a suspension of the license. Mr. President, 14J stipulates that the Commission may issue directions for the restructuring of a prescribed financial group or a prescribed financial institution where A, Mr. President, a group which comprises one or more prescribed financial institutions is not controlled by a prescribed holding company. B, the structure of a prescribed financial group is likely to impede group-wide supervision. Or C, Mr. President, a prescribed financial group has control of a branch, subsidiary, or a company outside of Jamaica. Or D, a prescribed financial institution is a member of a prescribed financial group which has a branch, subsidiary, or control of a company outside of Jamaica. Clause 7, Mr. President, deletes Section 16.1, D and I, and replaces it to update the relevant anti-money laundering and combating terrorism and proliferation of financial enactments under which the Commission may disclose information or the prior written request or on the prior written request of the Minister to the designated authority to facilitate any investigation of an offense under any of these acts. In 16.1e, Mr. President, the words "an overseas regulatory authority" is deleted and substituted with the words "a foreign financial regulatory authority," the new term defined in Section 2 as a regulatory authority in a country other than Jamaica, which has supervisory functions, A, with respect to a company that is incorporated and provides financial services in that country, and B, that are similar to the functions of the Bank of Jamaica or the Commission. Clause 8, Mr. President, Section 18.1b is revised to ensure that under this Act, the Commission may be empowered to make regulations providing for the imposition of fees and charges for licensing and regulation. This clause inserts Section 18.3, where the Minister may, taking into account the recommendations of the Commission, prescribe by order matters including A, license fee, B, group capital adequacy ratios and limits on capital gearing for the groups, C, Mr. President, group liquidity metric and limits for the intercompany balances, transactions, and large exposure for a prescribed financial group, and D, the risk management framework for the management of investment assets. Mr. President, Clause 9 inserts new sections 18A and 18B to give the Commission the power to make regulations for group-wide supervision of prescribed financial groups and to amend monetary penalties. In order to ensure effective group-wide supervision, Mr. President, of prescribed holding companies and constituent members of a prescribed financial group, the Commission, with the approval of the Minister, may make regulations, A, for the prescription of solvency and other requirements for prescribed financial groups, B, establishing minimum standards, Mr. President, and best practices for 1, corporate governance, 2, risk management, 3, large exposure and concentration limits, 4, intra-group transactions, 5, any standards that the Commission may deem fit, broad and clear as we seek to make sure that our regulatory authorities have the power that they need. C, Mr. President, for reporting and disclosure by companies within a prescribed financial group, including the prescribed holding company. Turning to the schedules, Mr. President, the schedules contained in the bill are as follows. Clause 13 contains provisions for the amendment to Part A of the third schedule. The provisions set out the circumstances under which the FSC can take remedial action for not only prescribed financial institutions, but also prescribed holding companies. Some of the circumstances under which the Commission may take enforcement actions are: 1, the prescribed financial institution, a prescribed holding company, or a director, employee, agent, or either of them in the conduct of the business of the prescribed financial institution or prescribed holding company, in engaging or about to engage in an unsafe or unsound business practice, or B, in contravening or has contravened: 1, Mr. President, any provision of the Act or any relevant act or regulations made thereunder, or 2, any condition of the license or registration granted under the Act or any relevant act. Mr. President, 2, a director or manager has ceased to be a fit and proper person, and the prescribed financial institution or prescribed holding company has refused or neglected to take appropriate action. Roman numeral 2, Clause 14, Mr. President, sets out the amendment to the fourth schedule to include fixed penalties for offenses relating to prescribed holding companies. It should be noted that an amendment was moved and passed in the House of Representatives to this clause. Consequent on the amendment moved to Clause 3, Mr. President, which stipulates that a company within a prescribed group or a prescribed financial institution which fails to comply with the directions, guidelines issued by the Commission commits an offense. The corresponding penalty was also included and was inadvertently omitted. As such, the amendment moved in as follows. In the fourth schedule, insert after the heading, the Financial Services Commission Act, the following: failure to 62E 200,000 comply with a direction or guideline issued by the Commission. Roman numeral 3, Clause 15, Mr. President, includes the insertion of new 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th schedules. 5th schedule contains the application for prescribed holding company. 6th schedule, Mr. President, contains the prescribed documents which are required to accompany any application for a license, for example, a strategic business plan. 7th schedule, Mr. President, contains a form of license or a certificate of license for prescribed holding company. And the 8th schedule, Mr. President, contains a fit and proper questionnaire. Consequential amendments to the pension superannuation funds and retirement schemes, insurance, and securities acts. Consequential amendments were also made to sector legislation to strengthen the regulatory framework for effective and comprehensive group-wide supervision of non-deposit taking groups. Mr. President, as I come to the conclusion, I just want to make it clear that all this work that is being done by the ministry, the agency, the FSC, and others, is to make sure that the kind of rules-based arrangement that we undertook 6, 7 years ago, that as much as possible, the rules, how you operate a business in Jamaica are clear. You don't have to be a friend of somebody in government or a minister, but the rules should be clear so that anybody can read it. And, in time, markets are dynamic. The rules may have to be amended again. But as of now, this is what we see. And so, Mr. President, in conclusion, the promulgation of the Financial Services Commission Amendment Act of 2024 will allow Jamaica to have another regulatory tool to enhance financial sector stability and offer a greater level of protection for financial consumers. We've been through the pandemic. We've been through other crises we've had to deal with, and yet our financial sector did not have any deleterious results on our economy. Therefore, in order to establish the group-wide supervisory framework for the non-deposit taking group, it is proposed that the Honorable Senate approves the amendments to the FSCA and consequential amendments to the pensions, superannuation funds, and retirement schemes, Insurance and Securities Act. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Minister Hill. Senator Dr. Floyd Morris.
No, I don't. Thank you.
Recognizing you from a seat other than your own.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I rise to give my support to the legislation because, Mr. President, we have a duty to make sure that we give the various institutions of government the requisite tools to be able to deal with their job effectively. And this is a part of the capacitation of our institutions, and we undoubtedly support it from this side. Mr. President, as I make my brief contribution, I want to make 3 observations. And the first one, I will start with a discussion that I heard on one of the radio programs yesterday with the Minister of Finance, outgoing Minister of Finance. And he was speaking to some of the challenges bedeviling the financial sector. And one of the things that he said was that some of the laws are archaic. And he was responding specifically to the question about the SSL saga. And as I read this piece of legislation, I figured that it might have been prompted from that experience. But the minister pointed out that some of the legislation relating to the financial sector are very much archaic. And it caused me to wonder, Mr. President, the job of a government and a minister is to, and by the way, Mr. President, before I continue, let me just extend good wishes to Minister Morris Dixon for her elevation, and to say, Minister, that we wish you all the best in your new role. And from me to you, one of the things that you will have to focus on is the whole issue of education of children with disabilities, and to push the disability inclusive education agenda. So I am looking forward to you rolling out that, because we are languishing behind where the inclusive education agenda is concerned, and I stand ready to assist in whatsoever way possible. So, Mr. President, so I'm expressing the concern that, the minister had pointed out some of the challenges in managing the financial sector and the archaic nature of the legislation. And I said to myself, but, the minister has come to this conclusion, and I don't think it's something that he would have concluded just on the cusp of him leaving his portfolio. And I know from my former involvement in government that one of the priorities of the Chief Parliamentary Council is to drive or to prepare money bills. So if you have a piece of legislation, I mean, bills affecting taxation or the financial sector, right? They are given priority. So within a short time, bills can, or amendments to bills, legislation can be brought here once it's related to taxation or the financial sector. And I'm just wondering why it is that the concerns as expressed by the minister were not addressed prior to him leaving the ministry, because this is one piece of legislation here, but I'm certain that some of the things that I heard him mention, could have been quickly dealt with in order to deal with some of the problems that are bedeviling the financial sector. And that is a matter that the government will have to deal with post-haste. I hope they would have had, or the minister would have left a series of these legislation that the government would deal with in very short order so that we can preserve and enhance the financial sector. Now, Mr. President, I pointed out that as I read the legislation, I gleaned that it would have been prompted from the experience of SSL. And I am happy that this piece of legislation has been brought to the fore, because it is very debilitating when you have individuals investing in an institution with the hope that they will get good returns in the future. And then one morning you get up and you hear that you have no money in the financial institution. And I feel the pain of our legend, our icon, Usain Bolt, in terms of what has happened to him in his experience with a particular company. And I wondered if this piece of legislation was there, in terms of the capacity of the Financial Sector Commission to interact and intervene more swiftly in some of these institutions, what would have happened. And it might be a little late, Senator Brown, but, I hope that all the experiences that we have gathered from SSL will trigger further strengthening of the legislative framework to make sure that the monies of our citizens are protected. Mr. President, and as I went through the legislation, I am particularly heartened by where we are going, because some time ago, I read of a financial institution lending monies to individuals without the necessary security, collateral And it was a significant block of funds. And from my understanding of how the financial sector works, you know, when I read the case, it should not be. And as I read the memorandum of objects here, I realized that the FSC would have the capacity to intervene and possibly investigate those institutions that engage in those practices. Because for me, you're not a financial institution and you are handling depositors' money. And depositors' money must be handled with due care. Due care. So to lend a large block of funds without having the necessary collateral in place is indeed a very risky and dangerous thing to do with depositors' money. And this is what I see this piece of legislation giving the capacity of the FSC to do. And the next observation that I want to make, Mr. President, is that we are capacitating the FSC, and I welcome it and I support it. We must do everything in our powers as lawmakers to give the tools to the requisite institutions to deal with illicit enrichment, to deal with the circulation of illegal funds in the economy, terrorism-related finances. And by the way, Mr. President, as I mentioned terrorism finances, I want to point out that in the memorandum of objects, you see, I see something here that says terrorism in C of the memorandum of objects. In C of the memorandum of objects, there's a word there that I am not accustomed to. Terrorism financing. I think it should be terrorism financing. The last line. In the last line. Yes. So I was looking for the word to see what it means, but I want to point out that it should be terrorism financing. So, Mr. President, we are strengthening the capacity of these institutions. And I want to say, Mr. President, I welcome this, because there are other institutions, for example, the Integrity Commission of Jamaica, that I personally want to see us as parliamentarians strengthen and make sure that they have all the tools possible to deal with the job that they are mandated to do. And I'm not going to join anybody to bash the Integrity Commission, because they have a job that they have to do. We who come to the parliament to serve the people must ensure that we walk the line carefully when it comes on to public resources. And I say to the Integrity Commission, no matter who the person is, they could be big, they could be small. Go after them once they take the oath of office to serve our country. They are not bigger than the Integrity Commission and its mandate. And as a parliamentarian, I pledge my support for the institution and pledge that I will do everything to make sure that they get the requisite legislation to do their work. Mr. President, we support the legislation and we support the amendments and hope that it will contribute to the strengthening of the financial sector. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Thank you, Senator Dr. Morris, just to distinguish the various Morrises and the various doctors. Senator Ransford Bram.
Mr. President, I would like to preface my comments by indicating that I do have some passing acquaintance with the principal legislation from, and even somewhat less passing, but an acquaintance with the regulator, in particular regulator in this context from a professional point of view. And I mention it, Mr. President, so that those who are listening, if required, may take it into account with respect to what I may say. And so, Mr. President, a long time ago, I was a student in another Caribbean country. So why you have to say it? And I'm quite attached to Barbados, but yes. But in those days, we were struggling greatly financially as a country, and I remember the needs that for the small amount of foreign exchange required you to camp out at the Bank of Jamaica. You have to first raise the money to buy the foreign exchange. There was no certainty that you would get it, and you had to camp out down at Nethersoul Place to ensure that you get the smalls. And then when I did arrive, I noticed that there were other persons who didn't seem to have any challenge in obtaining foreign exchange, Mr. President. And some of them, as the Jamaican people used to say, used to take it and tell we as to how much they were well endowed and who is not an ATM as against who is an ATM, and so on. I remember those days, Mr. President, and we have come to the stage because, and particularly I commend this government also for the management of the Jamaican economy, which of course has enabled persons and students and others to find themselves in a position that they can use foreign exchange as is required. And indeed, some of those who their students used to tell me then that they are not the ATM of this particular country. She was in my class. Anyhow, see that they now come to this country in search of foreign exchange for their uses elsewhere. And so, Mr. President, I would like to see that develop. I'd like to see that Jamaica continues to grow its financial industry, its economy generally, for the benefit of the people of Jamaica. And in particular, I would like to see that Jamaica may well one day become the financial hub of at least the English-speaking Caribbean. It's too small. Very well. Well, it may well be the hub already, where people do deals and resources and funds are raised, and that our institutions in Jamaica provide for the Caribbean as a whole, and in particular for the English-speaking Caribbean. That can only be of great benefit, Mr. President, to the people of Jamaica, to the young men and women who are studying, many of them financing and accounting and all of those matters, Mr. President, which would enhance the Jamaican economy and ensure that salaries of some significance are paid as a general rule, Mr. President, whether offshore or onshore. And so, Mr. President, the proper regulation of our financial industry, I call it, is of fundamental importance. And it ought to be facilitative of this process of expanding and developing that, what I call the financial industry. It is important, Mr. President, that it be transparent, Mr. President. It is important, Mr. President, that the regulator has ample powers. It's important that the regulator has the resources, financial, and the necessary human resources. But I suppose if you have the financial, you might then be able to buy, so to speak, the human resources. And that the regulator be nimble so that it is able to address new developments and so forth. In fact, Mr. President, one of the things I believe is that the regulator ought to be encouraging innovation in the industry, and also to keep up with what is happening in the world, Mr. President. I note in the memorandum of object, Mr. President, that the purpose to regulate the activities of prescribed financial institutions for the purpose of protecting consumers of financial services. And that's very, very, very important and fundamental. But I also would like to see the regulator regulate to facilitate the growth and development of the industry. Those who are the players, those who are the institutions who are doing business in the industry. So I hope that is taken into account based on their general law, that they would consider this, Mr. President, facilitate innovation, facilitate growth, while protecting the consumers of the services in the industry, Mr. President. But I come to the last point that I wish to make, Mr. President, and that is what I call recourse. The law, and I presume that the regulator is always acting in good faith, always. But as they carry on their duty, they will discover that there will be disagreements between themselves and those with whom they have the responsibility to regulate. And that happens every day. And of course, the regulator has the final say. But what bothers me is, what is the situation when the regulator is wrong? Because it is the nature of human beings that you are capable of error. At least I am capable of error. And from my observation, I haven't met a human being yet who is not. I have had occasions where human beings have told me that they are not capable of error, only to see them falling into grave error. So it is just a fact of life. And so the question then, the general principle in our system is that if you believe the regulator is in error, you must go to court. There is some limited internal recourse in certain areas to apply to tribunals, to appeal, but in the financial industry, it's, in my view, very limited. So that the general recourse is that you must go to court. But I believe, Mr. President, in an industry that moves very quickly, the regulator often has to move very quickly. if we understand the courts, it is not designed, Mr. President, to respond to that type of industry, at least initially. So where things have to happen overnight, within a week, within a day, within a month, the court, even with its improvement, even with the establishment of the commercial court, is usually not capable of responding in such a manner. That's the first point. And the second point is that the very popular phrase of judicial review, that is what is said is the basis of the court's review of regulators, administrative functions, and so on. But while judicial review sounds exciting and even sexy, we must bear in mind, Mr. President, that judicial review is a very limited process. It is mostly interested in procedural matters. And unless you can show a glaring disobedience of the legislation, it hardly deals with substantial issues. In addition to that, you must bear in mind, Mr. President, that the court is always deferential to an administrative body or regulator, particularly those bodies that appear to have specialized skills and knowledge. And so I am a judge, and you bring financial matters before me. I am not a judge, of course. I'm just using as an example. But you bring before me financial information, economics matters, accounting, all of which I am unfamiliar with, then I will tend to default to those who I have good faith and faith in to rely upon them. There you have it. There you have it. There you have it. That's fine. That's fine. But at least I know my weakness, you see? And so what I'm saying, though, is that the court, the default position is to give a reserve position to the regulator. So it is... No, well, I'm not actually... That's a different issue. But on another occasion, that matter that you are referring to, Senator Scott Matley, the matter that you are referring to, but you are not referring to, I will have an occasion to speak about that. But I'm not talking about that matter that you are not referring to today. But I think, though, you must consider yourself, because many of us will never find ourselves in the position of being regulated or dealing with a regulator. The relationship is excellent, I'm sure, most times, but there are times when there are disagreements. If decisions are implemented with great speed and alacrity, by the time you get to court, it may be too late. And so, Mr. President, I know that in the Senate sometime 2 or 3 weeks ago, the question of the multiplicity of tribunals and so on, that question was put on the table and raised. But for every decision that a regulator makes, there must be an internal mechanism of review. For every decision that a regulator makes, there must be an internal mechanism of review. That is likely to respond far quicker than any court. So that if the regulatee, if there is such a thing, is unhappy, she will then be able to go before that internal tribunal and say, I think the regulator has made a mistake. No, not for everything. Not for everything, believe me. There is one there for some things under the Securities Act, but not for everything. I am suggesting when these matters come for review that the internal mechanism is not limited to some things, but for all decisions, so that those who are subject to the regulation may have speedy recourse to a tribunal, and if they believe that the regulator's decision could be detrimental, they can say to the internal mechanism and apply to that mechanism for a stay until the matter is speedily, and if the stay is granted, that the matter then be speedily dealt with, and so on. After that process is finished, if they want to go to court after that, that's fine. But at least they would have gotten a quick and urgent way to say, we didn't agree with the regulator didn't take this into account, or didn't take it into account sufficiently, they were mistaken, look at this again, and so forth. Or the remedy that we are suggesting is a good remedy. The regulator is being a little too tough or a little too whatever, and so that the matter can be considered. It is important to keep faith in the regulator and to reduce disquiet and unhappiness. And so as we go forward and as these legislation are reviewed, I am asking that it be considered in the future, that it be a widespread thing for the decisions of the regulator, that the citizen may feel that they have easy, responsible recourse when they happen to strongly disagree. My understanding, Mr. President, when it comes to regulators, most times, overwhelmingly most times, the regulator put its views and they come to a decision and an accommodation with the regulatee. They have a talk, the regulator explains, and they say, we didn't see it that way. Yes, all right. Or, we don't agree with you, but since you're sorry to do it, we are going to do it. And that's the end of the matter. But probably 5% of the time, there are fundamental disagreements. And those 5% provision should be made so that it can be speedily dealt with. It would enhance the system. It would benefit the regulator, and it would benefit those who are regulated. So having said that, Mr. President, it seems to me that that would only then make the system even better. And these amendments will only bring efficiency, and it will serve to protect the public. And I hope when they are applied, even serve to enhance the industry, yes, promote innovation and the expansion of the industry for the benefit of all. And for those students who are going off to those particular islands and elsewhere today, they no longer have to face any words being thrown at them, Mr. President. And a lot of that is due to the work of the regulator and the industry itself. And so, Mr. President, I will support the amendments, and I thank you and my colleagues for listening.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Brown?
Thank you, President. Let me start by also congratulating...
Senator Brown, you want the lectern?
No. Don't need it. I'm not going to be reading. No, leave it. Yeah. President, let me start by adding my word of congratulations to Minister Senator Dana Morris Dixon on her elevation to the tough job. I'm not sure if it should be congratulations or condolences, but commiseration. But we wish you well. Your youthful energy, we hope, will bring the transformation that is necessary and has been too long in coming in that ministry. Last week you spoke, Minister, and you indicated to us that you were a graduate of a college just below JC, Campion College. We wish to, on this side, extend to the education fraternity, to Campion College, to the parents of that youngster, to the students there, our condolences on the tragedy that took place during this week. Another feeder school, St. Peter and Paul, had a similar accident some time ago, and we said then that we're going to put in strict regulations, goalposts, only to see that it occurred. So one thing we wish, Minister, for you to do is to not just promise to make change, but to deliver on those changes. Because one life loss of that potential engineer, doctor, politician, accountant, whatever that person could have been, is a sad loss to our country. So to his parents, friends, our condolences. President, in a debate like this, well, before I come to the debate, let me also say that we congratulate the elevation of Senator Samuda. But we thought that he would have been to another place. But we also thought that he would not have waited a whole month without being reassigned or assigned elsewhere. But such is the nature of things. And so, as we come to this debate on the Financial Services Act, I'm missing a colleague from among us who would participate in such a debate. And so my solidarity and support goes out to the private sector rep who would speak not just as a bureaucrat or a technocrat, Senator Branson, but as somebody who is in the field and who represents the views of the private sector. So we miss Don's participation in this debate, and we wish for him the best. We note the ascension to the Order of Jamaica, and we also think he deserves congratulations on that. So Don, wherever you are, we miss you in the debate. And we look also ministers for the 21st senator to join us. It's what, over a month now or more that we're one shot. So we're looking forward to the completion of the team. So Senator Abraham, they're the people of Jamaica's business. The Constitution said 21. Yeah. Senator Ransom, this sector is a sector globally that has to be regulated. The name in the Caribbean, Stanford, doesn't argue well for the sector. Maybe some cricketers benefited. We have seen cases like Olint and Cash Plus, which begs for regulation of the sector. In fact, it is the lack of regulations in our country over many years that led to the financial meltdown that gave rise to a solution called FinSAC. FinSAC was never the problem. FinSAC was a solution to the problem. President, I remember a couple years, some years ago, I was in Trinidad when the first CLICO crash took place. And when that crash took place, I was traveling on the road with friends. And they said, hold on, my car insurance just disappeared in the CLICO crash. So all of a sudden, you thought your car was insured, and that gone. The financial sector left without the proper regulations led to what the crisis that we have. And Senator Hill, you're right. They move the debt around. They invest in the monstrosities that they engage in during that period and create the massive problem that FinSac had to fix. And I say this because, President, FinSac has gotten such bad name. But I remember as a union officer being at Jamaica Center Gale when the banks were collapsing, when people were calling me from sentence to say, should we keep our money in X institution because we hear that there's a run. And so, I was at Jamaica and the workers were worried, Senator Gale, that they would lose their pension. And I remember Dr. Omar Davis coming to address the management and workers in a mass workers meeting at Jamaica and assuring them that not a single one of them would lose their pension. But that assurance wasn't just for the Jamaica workers. It was for every pensioner in Jamaica. And I can say, Senator Fitzhenley, without fear of contradiction, not a single pensioner suffer any pension loss because of the meltdown, because of the rapacious capitalists who had caused it. I can go further. Not only did the workers and their pension scheme survive, but no depositor in any of the banks that went under lost a penny of their deposit. P.J. Patterson, Omar Davis and their cabinet ensured the protection of the ordinary people and even those who weren't ordinary with plenty of money. That's FinSac that came also to provide other protection for people, including former ministers of the Jamaica Labour Party government. Including former ministers of the Jamaica Labour Party government. So these financial regulations are important to protect our people going forward. Mr. President, subsequent to the meltdown and the introduction of FinSac to mop up and save those who needed to be saved. Because it's not unusual for borrowers to default, and for borrowers to be impacted. It's not unusual. It happened. It happened. But no depositor, no pensioner, no insurance policy holder lost in that meltdown because the government of the day protected them. President, I would have expected today for us to be discussing a bill that is not coming after the collapse of one of these financial institutions. It is the first such collapse since the 90s. It happened under the watch of Andrew Michael Holness as Prime Minister. These regulations we're coming with now, these amendments would have prevented it if they came earlier. But you know what would also have prevented it? If ministers would just read the reports sent to them from the regulatory body. Because SSL, for which this action is being taken post SSL, these actions are being taken post the collapse of SSL. Maybe if those reports sent to the minister was read, maybe if we had listened to the board led by Howard Mitchell, what has happened would not have happened to the consumers of financial services, which is what the FSC is set up to do, to protect the consumer of financial services. SSL didn't just come down like the rain outside now. It was set up from the morning before, set up from the evening before, set up from the days before, set up from months before. Didn't just happen so. Some saw it coming. Some saw it coming and took out their umbrella. They were protected. They suffer no loss in SSL. And that happened after FSC made reports to the relevant minister, which raised the issue that Senator Braham mentioned. The FSC does have an appeal tribunal. Yes, maybe limited and make the amendment to extend its role. But the FSC also has a board appointed with the approval of the Cabinet of Jamaica. That ought to be an internal review mechanism. And after the board, there's a minister. And the minister does have some superintendency. SSL was therefore a failure of the FSC and those in charge of the FSC, the board, the ministry, and the cabinet. Everybody in in SSL ought to have been given an umbrella. Ought to have been given an umbrella so they wouldn't get wet up. Their money could have been lodged in their account. Their money could have been lodged in their account. And so, President, this debate and the FSC Amendment Act requires some truth to be told, even though some people in here are squealing about the standard of the debate. A debate without truth being told is a grand waste of parliamentary time. And so, those truths has to be told. See, Mr. President, I want to lift the standard according to them by citing former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, who said recently that it is the government who warrant to the citizens of the country that it is safe to put their monies in these institutions like SSL. I want you to be like the man from Olaba who cursed the former prime minister. I want you to quote to be like the man from down at Olaba who cursed the former prime minister Bruce Bolin for saying the government has a responsibility to prevent such failures. And this legislation that we're debating goes somewhere belatedly, but we welcome it in making the preparation. I know, and the country knows, that the FSC has had in recent time members of financial institutions being reported to them for giving out loans in a manner that omits collateral and proper security. Senator Morris hinted at it. It's not the first time that loans are given out without security and the necessary collateral. A former prime minister of the country, as a beneficial owner of a company, saw that company getting a massive loan. And Senator Hill, why these amendments are necessary? It is because, and as an ex-banker, you would understand this, the bank who gave that loan forgot that they gave the loan. The bank that gave that loan forget that they gave the loan. And the borrower didn't remember that he had gotten the loan. And that was part of all that came out in the Commission of Inquiry, for which we can't see a full report after $160 million was paid for that report. So I hope that these amendments will lead to nobody forgetting that they lend money or that the borrower forget that it was lent in. That's just the reality. And so, when you mention, Senator Hill, about 20% representing the beneficial owner threshold, I wonder to myself whether or not, if I'm involved in a company with 25%, 30%, or even 100%, whether or not the beneficial owner status will apply to me, and whether it is okay for the FSC or any other government agency investigating issue of finance, well, let's say illicit enrichment, or money laundering, or any financial crime, well, it would be okay for them to pierce the veil, the corporate veil. That seems to be a live issue in the country. Can the corporate veil be pierced? And so we took two bills today. Segregated accounts bill. It has a definition of beneficial owner. And I believe, sorry? No, just hold a second. I know you don't know it. Hold on. I know you don't know it. The Segregated Accounts Companies Act speaks to beneficial owner having the meaning in the Companies Act. But this one today Yeah, you said that. But this one today, this one we're debating now, does not have that. Does not have that. It says in this one, beneficial owner as the meaning of in the trust and corporate services providers act. Maybe it's the same. When I get a letter from the Integrity Commission that speaks to beneficial owner, whether you're a beneficial owner, is there a consistency? Is there a consistency in the definition of beneficial owner? There may be. Because, Senator Gill, you and I know that under different laws, the definition of a worker is not the same. Holiday with Pay Act different from the Labor Relation Industrial Dispute Act or the Employment Termination Redundancy Payment Act. So, what I'm saying, just as I raised the issue about so many tribunals in my question, we need to make sure that the term beneficial owner is consistent. I'm not saying it is not. I'm simply saying because I'm simply saying you have reference to different pieces of legislation. So I didn't get a chance to look at the Integrity Commission Act to see what does beneficial owner refers to. And if all of them meet the 20% threshold, and if all of that means that the veil of corporate veil can be pierced, because in the investigation of these things, it is necessary that the corporate veil be pierced so people can know how money passes through accounts. Because it is that passing through of accounts that led in the main to the financial meltdown in the past. It is the greed and the corruption that added to that process. And this is why, like Senator Morris, I stand with the Integrity Commission. And so, Mr. President, given I hear squealing. And this is why, Mr. President, this is why we on this side support these belated amendments. Have you given somebody permission to be squealing that loud, President? So we support these, and we hope that we will never see consumers of financial services suffer in the way those at SSL under the leadership of this government, that is to say, the FSC under the leadership of this government, has allowed so many persons to suffer. Like Senator Morris spoke to Usain Bolt. Usain is not the only one. This one, Minister Hill, is on your government. Claim the paternity because the DNA says this is on the watch of Andrew Michael Holness. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Minister Morris Dixon.
Yeah, no, for substantive reasoning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm going to stick to to facts and reality
All right.
in my presentation. And I'll be very, very short in doing this. And Mr. President, this bill represents, without doubt, an essential step in Jamaica's ongoing, and I emphasize ongoing, efforts to modernize and strengthen our financial regulatory framework to respond to our local needs and ensure that our systems are on par with international standards and best practices. And I have to outline the fact that Jamaica was put on a gray list. And this year, because of the awesome work of a lot of individuals, including individuals at the FSC and also at the Bank of Jamaica and the company's office, I can't leave them out, and across a lot of other competent authorities across Jamaica. We, at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, everybody, we've been able to come off of the gray list. And it's not, that's not an easy task for any country to do. And I know that a few years ago, many individuals were concerned that Jamaica would in fact be blacklisted. But this administration worked tirelessly in order to implement policies and many laws and amendments to laws to ensure that Jamaica had the kind of framework that would allow us to stand and say to the world that we are definitely committed to the stability of our financial system. And we got an amazing report from the Financial Action Task Force detailing the work of Jamaica, also saying that in many of the areas that Jamaica is outperforming the rest of the world in our regulatory framework. But this is not a one-time effort. This is an ongoing effort. And so we have to look at this regulation within that parameter. And as we look at history, and I know I came into knowing myself in the 1990s, and I saw what happened in the 1990s. I saw individuals who were much older than me, that were persons I respected, were family members who were devastated, decimated during the 1990s, during our financial crisis. And so sometimes when I hear some of the discussions around FinSAC, I have to wonder if it's the same thing that I experienced. Because a lot of people, including individuals in my own family, were affected adversely by it and are struggling today because of what happened in the 1990s. And so we have to really be very honest in our assessment of what happened then. And so we've seen from our history that financial crises can destabilize our economies, erode public trust, and have a lasting impact on livelihoods, and including the growth and prosperity of our country. The financial challenges faced by Jamaica in the 90s and even the global financial crisis of 2007 exposed significant regulatory vulnerabilities. And it wasn't just Jamaica, it's all around the world it exposed vulnerabilities. And even now, it has become clear that some of the systems that emerged and that we set up after those crises still require work, and that is understood. The regulatory framework has to change with times. We have new products, and over time, you see how we need to change. And that's what the administration has been doing. And it's important, though, that as we look at this set of these amendments that are being done to the FSC Act, that we also put them in broader context in relation to work that we are doing. We already know that we did the Banking Services Act, and we allowed for consolidated supervision in that space. And in doing that, we actually did take in a lot of the regulated companies that fall under the FSC, because once there is a DTI, in a deposit-taking institution in the group, they fall under the consolidated supervision rules as prescribed by the Banking Services Act. And so what we've done in this one is to add that type of strengthening for institutions that do not have a DTI in their group structure. And that is a step in the right direction, and it is filling a gap that would have existed, and it is an important one for us to fill. But this isn't the end of it. And so while I welcome this today, I want to talk about some of the other things that we're doing, and one in particular. Mr. President, these changes that we see here are definitely important and open the door for further improvements. And I draw your attention to the Twin Peaks model, which has been adopted by several advanced economies, including even Australia and the United Kingdom. And this has been discussed in the House of Representatives by our former Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clark. And I would like to add my own perspectives on the matter, since this is here today and we're getting to where we actually want to get to with this, but this is not the entirety of it. And so as we debate it, we also have to look at what is to come. And for those who are watching, and I've come to recognize that there are many people who watch the Senate, I would just explain what this means. And under the Twin Peaks, you have two different regulatory bodies that are established. One focused on prudential regulations, which is to ensure financial stability, and the other on conduct regulation to protect consumers. And that is a really, really important part. And I think we've gone very far with this in relation to the prudential side. But the reality is you have two different prudential regulators. You have the Bank of Jamaica, you have the Financial Services, the FSC. And so we do have to look at the system and look globally at what has worked. And what has worked is having the prudential regulation all under one umbrella, because you then have the full 360-degree view of the financial sector. So you don't have one entity regulating some and another entity regulating the others. Even though they work very closely together and they share a lot of information, it could still be a better regulatory framework. And so the Twin Peaks model that was announced by Dr. Clark actually takes this piece of regulation even further in relation to allowing for both of those entities to be basically put together under the BOJ to provide prudential regulation. And then you would have the second body, which is the conduct regulator, which is an important one, and which is the one when you talk to Jamaicans, they have a lot of concern about. And for that other one, it would center on consumer protection and market integrity, which is absolutely important. And that's what I hear or people saying. How do you protect me as a consumer when I am interacting with the banks and with other financial institutions? I want to know that there is a mechanism around the protection, my protection. And so this second regulator's mandate would be to monitor how financial products and services are sold, ensuring that consumers are treated fairly and that financial institutions uphold high standards of transparency, ethical conduct, and accountability. And from my experience working in a jurisdiction where you had the Twin Peaks, I found it fascinating. And it's a pity that Senator Dr. Professor Morris is not here, because in those jurisdictions, the conduct authority even looks at accessibility vis-a-vis your website to ensure that every consumer of financial services is actually taken care of, and that you are ensuring that they have as much access to information as everybody else does. It looks at even the way the font is on your website and prescribes regulations around that, even in relation to flashing lights for those who may be affected by flashing lights. And so in other jurisdictions, they take conduct very far because they understand that a financial sector must cater to every single individual and must protect their right to access and also safeguard their funds at the same time. And so conduct regulation would be particularly relevant to Jamaica as it strengthens safeguards for citizens and enhances their trust and confidence in the financial sector. And this model we are already working on, and the BOJ is well on the way with its consultations that has started. So while we're here debating this, the government is not waiting. We are already discussing the way forward, and the way forward is to even strengthen the framework even more by having that separation and moving to the Twin Peaks model. And not just having the consultations, which is wonderful, but you're seeing some evidence of more focus on conduct, because we saw where, for example, guidelines for the operation of ABMs were issued. And that was in response to Jamaicans saying that there were many instances where they had to be driving around and trying to find a machine to give them money. And I think all of us may have experienced that last week and on the weekend where there were challenges. And so those guidelines have been helpful, and that's another step in the right direction in relation to getting conduct as a part of the entire framework. So these amendments we see here today are only a step towards building capacity within the existing framework while simultaneously working for a longer term, more robust regulatory structure for Jamaica. And Mr. President, we must always remember that financial regulation, even though it seems very dense when you read the bill, is not merely technical. It is at its core a commitment to safeguarding the hard-earned monies of ordinary Jamaicans, protecting the reputation of our financial sector, and building a foundation for sustainable economic growth. And for the economic future of Jamaica, I believe we must remain focused on putting in place a framework that will inspire investor confidence further and better protect the people of Jamaica and their livelihoods. So, Mr. President, I agree with Senator Brown that this is an important bill, and it is important for us to support this bill, and that this bill is just part of a larger framework that shows that the government is committed to making the financial sphere as robust as possible, and more importantly, protecting the interests of every single Jamaican. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Scott Marley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, just thank you. So, Mr. President, I am delighted to follow the new Minister of Education and I think information, and very soon, very soon we'll have to coin some new ways of which terminologies for addressing you. You know, I want to start with an odd thing, and that is to ask for some consistency in the definition of a beneficial owner. Because I heard everybody saying it's the same thing, it's the same thing, but it is not, in fact, the same thing, because there are different standards under the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act and under the Companies Act. Because under the Companies Act, the requirement was reduced to 25% ownership, whereas under the Trust and Corporate Services Act, the requirement is 20%. So there should be a level of consistency within the financial structure and framework when you are talking about beneficial ownership. And I would ask respectfully, Minister, that you take a look at that. It's actually 10%. I thought you had addressed us and said 20% actually. And if that is a mistake on my part, then it only aggravates the point. It does not resolve the point. It only aggravates it because there's a great disparity between 25% and 10%. And so the government has to get its policy framework consistent, especially in this sector, where it does not only impact those of us who reside here and do business, but those of us, those who are looking on to Jamaica to determine whether it is really a place that you would want to do business. I also want to point out that when the Financial Services Commission was established, and I'm reading this because I don't want to bring any politics into it. This is not from the PNP website. It says that the FSC was established against the background of a comprehensive set of legislative and institutional reforms since the financial sector crisis of the mid-1990s. As a statutory agency, the Commission was set up to ensure the adoption of international best practices, a risk-based approach to management, and to enforce strict monitoring and supervision standards for the sectors it regulates. Everybody should know that the world is constantly changing, and that when you implement a set of measures today, you ought to be looking at revising it for the future. That is, in fact, why legislation, a recent legislation, will call for review after 5 years. The administration of the 1990s began to take all sorts of steps to prevent another FinSac. In fact, I will tell you that there are people who do not keep more than 1.5 million in any of their accounts. And that is because of the measures introduced by Prime Minister P.J. Patterson to protect depositors up to 1.5 million. JDIC.
So if you have 28,
I forgot the jingle, and I can't believe I forget it because. Thank you. So I do applaud this measure, and I support it, but it has to be contextualized because it did not just suddenly emerge from thin air. It was a result of measures which were put into place to strengthen our regulatory framework. What should be decried is the fact that SSL, because we all feel that this is around SSL, that SSL was allowed to continue as a problem institution for as long as it did. I recall very much in 2016 when the then chairman, having pressed for action to be taken and having been met with opposition, stepped down as chairman after 1 year. So let the records speak. Let us have an honest conversation about what has happened so that we will not repeat the same mistakes. When I hear, even last week when we were discussing Professor Floyd Morris's motion for the elderly, I reflected on the fact that an octogenarian, a woman over 80 years old, was one of those depositors who lost all our savings in SSL. You know what that is like? You're talking about the persons who suffered from the financial meltdown. But having experienced that in the 1990s, in 2022, that is still happening. Where somebody has had their entire life savings wiped out and disappeared from their account. This is, there are some things that we don't have to create any mystery about. We can acknowledge that things have happened and that as a result of it, we have actually benefited as a country. There's a side to the financial meltdown that nobody speaks about, but I recall. Because nobody speaks about the fact, you're too young, Senator Fick said it, don't get involved in this one. You have told me before my age, and I respect it today. Because one of the things that people don't talk about is the interest rates which they were making on their deposits. Interest rates at the time was 50% and 60%. And so every single month, depositors were getting those kinds of refunds. Senator Hill, don't say that. Don't say that. Because people were in cash plus, were poor people. People in Orient were poor people. And poor people, and I think what by poor people you mean not at a certain social level. That is how I interpret it. Not at a certain social level. They understand when you can get benefits from investing in an institution that pays good interest. And that's why we have had cash plus. You know how many domestic workers, farmers, street sweepers got hurt by that? Because you think they don't want to make money too, and they don't look out opportunities. It's not just rich people. It's not just rich people who are their money invested in banks. But I have not left the FSC. Quite to the contrary. And I'm going to go on in the same vein that everybody has been permitted to go on. When your Minister of Finance departed, he lamented the fact that there were archaic laws. I'm not quoting him directly, but he said there were laws, financial laws, which needed to be updated. As far as I can see, this government has been in place from 2016, and it's 2024. And if you are so committed to fiscal prudence and a financial framework of which you should be so proud and of which you boast every day, the Minister of Finance should be able to say that when he's leaving. Because when I came here, one of the things that I was told why we needed to facilitate certain pieces of legislation going through quickly is that at that time, that the opposition had done everything that was possible to facilitate the financial prudence requirements of the International Monetary Fund. So there was an awareness of the urgency of these things. And I dare say that having regard to how this opposition has performed, that it is well established that it would have been accommodated. If we are talking about real, what we call prudence and governance in the fiscal space, in the financial space, I ask you again, Senator, why is it that you have a Microcredit Act passed from 2021? You have people been saying they are not fit and proper to serve in the financial arena, and you don't have an appeal tribunal to which they can take their matter. That don't sound like prudence to me. That sounds like neglect. And neglect in an area where we are talking about people being able to earn in a situation for which they are trained. And they have no opportunity to challenge a decision which has been made against them. So those are matters that the government must also address. So even while I appreciate this piece of legislation, I think it is overdue. I think that the signs were on the horizon a long time ago that this needed to be passed. And my caution, as well as my urging to the government, is don't wait for a crisis to amend the laws. You know, it's like when you see a pothole developing in the road and it's a tiny little thing, and then you send the workmen to go and square it out, they call it. You square it out in preparation for filling it up, and then you leave it for 3 months, just unattended, and the problem gets larger and larger. And it doesn't get fixed until there's a demonstration or a car drop in there, or you hear somebody drown in one. So, Mr. President, I support this legislation. And I think it is very important that it be passed, but I also do say, please, Minister Hill, look back at the element of consistency in the beneficial ownership. I don't think it will do you any harm to do it. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Minister Hill. All right.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Minister Hill.
I am pleased that we've reached a stage in the debate concerning the FSC Act. You know, Senator Morris talked about the archaic nature of bills. And I watched Senator Scott Motley, who generally is even. Today, too many. I am interested in that uneven side. Mr. President, because she today, I've known her for a while, so it was interesting to see that side in such public view today, Mr. President. But it surprised me because while I would have expected that from a senator who normally sits where he sits now behind her, I was a little bit surprised that it came so forcefully from her. Because, why? Because she's been dealing with the law for a very long time. Not long in terms of old, but long in terms of experience. And she knows, Mr. President, that she has had to deal with laws that are on the books for a long time, that especially, I know she does corporate things with the law apart from the others, because you're right before me and I like that other side that I saw today. So, Mr. President, when you have a law and you deal with a law like she has, you know that to change a law in Jamaica takes quite some time. In fact, any good country that runs by the rule of law. For instance, this law started actually in 2015, long before FSC happened. It was circulated for discussion in 2017, long before SSL happened, sorry. Long before SSL happened. So all the pontification, Mr. President, all the pontification about this is being done as a reaction to SSL is entirely incorrect. But it's not surprising The only surprising part is that Senator Scott Motley would have associated her considerable amount of passion on the other side with that kind of association. It started well before. So we have now gone and these consultations have happened. We're here. Last night, I met with practitioners in the business who sought me out to say this and this and this and this and this still, because business is dynamic. When you decide something in 2017, we brought this bill to Parliament the first time in 2023. Since then, things have happened. You're being told you need to consider this. Sometimes, Mr. President, I remember with the Companies Act. Give you a good example. Companies Act, when it came to us, I remember Minister Johnson Smith and myself went through that entire act, big, long one. And we had to forego the changing of the audit, reading of the audit reports at annual general meeting in order to get the Companies Act through in time to meet the FATF requirement. If we had taken that reading of the audit committee, we'll never take it. So now we're going to take it out of the Companies Act, separate it. My team is working on it with the Companies Act, one of my agencies, to make sure we deal with now expeditiously the reading of the Audit Act. So making laws take time. I just want it on the record that the FSC Act that we're completing today started well before SSL. It's not a reaction to. There are other things, I mean, my State of the Nation is coming up. I have things that I will quote, but today is not that day. As Senator Graham, we know him as, you know, yes, prof, the legal prof here. So, but he then, Senator Graham, Senator Graham brought up the issue that I'm pretty sure, practicing the kind of law he does, people in the financial sector would have talked to him too. And he talked about something that is a sort of in contradiction with what Senator Brown, the way you listen to Senator Brown is that, you know, almost everybody is a thief and you must regulate. Well, having lived in that sector for a while, if you do not regulate sensibly, you will have problems. If you over-regulate, you stop growth. I remember, speaking of regulation, there's an anecdote told of Bill Gates going to India and said, look, we want to, how did this country in India, this was late 90s, early 2000s, how a country like India became the digital force in the world, the IT force in the world? How could it be? It's a poor country. And I think it may have, I'm pretty sure it was Prime Minister Manmohan, not Manmohan Singh, but Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, who said, it was Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, who said to Bill Gates, you know why we became the IT leader in the world? Simply this. What they were doing in Bangalore, the government had no idea how to deal with it. They had no idea what was going on. In other words, they had to grow. We're now, if we over-regulate, and I want to see, remember now, we put two acts together. Today, we have GIFSA. The reason why we're pushing GIFSA, and I don't want to take away so much from my SON later on, is that this has to be a growth industry. We are not going to be a manufacturing force like China, or even a small Liechtenstein, which has a very super educated workforce.
Time is now 1:20.
Mr. President, the time being 1:20, might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Members, you have heard the question. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. Minister.
And so, Mr. President, we have to make sure that GIFSA is put in place for segregated accounts, for limited general accounts, for international services that we can sell to get to the place where Cayman, Bermuda, BVIR, many Jamaicans work in those industries. We need to have the regulation and laws to bring them back home to build our industry, because that has to be a growth industry for this country when you look at how wealthy those countries are. And we intend to do that. This FSC Act is part of that. So I'm saying, supporting Senator Braham and cautioning Senator Brown, cautioning that, yes, we must regulate well, but we must not over-regulate. And yes, Senator Braham, we must make sure that we have an industry that is not so tightly regulated that it can't breathe and grow. Also want to mention, as we bring this to a close, Mr. President, that regulation, Senator Brown, does not take away the right and the responsibility of managers of these institutions to use their discretion and their experience and their training. I've been there. You can't dictate to a management as to how it must make a loan. Some loans will be unsecured because the risk is mitigated in another way, and some will be secured. So as the FSC, this act is not taking away that responsibility from managers to manage their institutions well. And sometimes, Senator Brown, Mr. President, mistakes are made by managers because they are human beings, and sometimes they are less efficient than they need to be. I have seen enough of that without having to ascribe it to greed or malice. So we have to be careful. Otherwise you're going to have overregulation or people in institutions who are so scared to make a decision that nothing happens in the industry in our country. We don't want either of those places. So this FSC regulation is on the right track. No doubt amendments will come. So I'm pleased to see, Mr. President, that financial practitioners in the financial sector must also be vigilant. They must say to the regulator, why do we have this? You need to explain it to us. We're now in a place where transparency is important. We have to create products and sell products to people in this market and overseas markets. Why do we have this? And discussion must happen. And out of that, as Senator Braham said, good decisions come. And also, as we talk about some archaic legislation, remember, this is in this house and the law and that other place, it's a baton passing business. Minister Nigel Clark got the baton from somebody else and now passes it on. But he never, ever, nobody in that position will ever complete all the work that is going to be done. Because when we came in, we had to do a bunch load of legislation. I need to remind you about the fact that we did the BOJ Act that made sure the BOJ was independent. We made sure we did the Financial Administration and Audit Act to make sure that things are done properly, and a slew of others. The Companies Act. The Companies Act that was so complex and is still so complex, and we got it through FATF. So let me tell you, that FATF thing is a big thing, especially that's why GIFSA was not done before now. We had to get FATF in place. So, Mr. President, we stand on a solidly good record. This FSC bill is a wonderful bill, and I recommend it for approval.
Thank you, Minister Hill. You're going to ask for the bill to read a second time.
That the bill be read
A second time. The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against, the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Services Commission Act read a second time.
Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause.
No, there's no amendment.
Chairman, I was just making a proposal that since we don't have any amendments being proposed, then we could deal with the bill in a particular way, subject, of course, to your approval.
Thank you, members. So I put clauses 1, 2, and 3. Right through 1 to 20. All right. Thought we were going to just lump them and go very well. 1 to 20. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister.
Mr. President, I'm asking for the third reading of the bill.
Question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Services Commission Act read a third time and passed.
Because there has been so much work by so many. I want to recognize all the participants from the Ministry of Finance, where the bill started. Dashna, thank you, my dear, and your colleagues, Aisha, all the others who came to brief, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Hamilton, all the others from the FSC, my own team. My chief counsel couldn't be here today, Mrs. Sutherland, but Janika is here and her colleague. So all the people who have worked outside of the parliament. Of course, the clerk this morning was very, very efficient, came in time, gave me a thorough briefing and rundown, for which I appreciate it. Because I have 3 bills to process today. So I want to record that, Mr. President. What's the name? I'm moving for the suspension of standing orders to take the third bill, the Trade Act, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. Would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Proceed, Minister, please.
Mr. President, the Trade Act was enacted in 1995 to regulate trade in goods. Section 8.1 of the Act, among other things, empowers the minister to prohibit, by order, whether absolutely, I'm okay, whether absolutely or except under the authority of a license granted by the minister, the importation and exportation of goods or any class or description of goods from or to another country. In 2018, Mr. President, the government of Jamaica announced the implementation of a ban on the importation, manufacture, and distribution of specific types of single-use plastic products with the objective of safeguarding human health and the environment from the adverse impacts of plastics in accordance with World Trade Organization agreement obligations. And on December 24, 2018, Mr. President, the Trade, Plastics, Packaging Materials Prohibition Order 2018 order was published prohibiting the importation of classes of plastic goods on a phased basis. The order was subsequently amended in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Many of us will recall, Mr. President, now MP Matthew Samuda, then minister in MEGJEC, leading that cause to make sure we could get single-use plastics banned, because it has caused, and unfortunately still causes, quite a bit of havoc in our drainage system, in the sea. We've seen tons and tons and tons of plastic bags and plastic bags containing stuff in our shoreline, and so it was very necessary to do it. These orders then, Mr. President, were initiated by the Portfolio Ministry with responsibility for the environment, and in our collaborated fashion, the MIIC, the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, where the Trade Act resides, is facilitating and enabling the implementation of the policy. In January 2024, Mr. President, the government of Jamaica announced the implementation of the fourth phase of the ban on single-use plastics, which would eliminate from the domestic market single-use plastic food containers and replaced styrofoam containers, as well as cosmetic care or personal care products for which microbeads or microplastics have been intentionally added. The government, Mr. President, further indicated to the public that consignments ordered prior to the effective date of the prohibition would be allowed to be landed. In keeping with the main objective, Mr. President, the Trade, Plastics, Packaging Materials Amendment Order 2024, the order, was promulgated on July 11, 2024, which effected an absolute prohibition on the importation of plastic food containers effective as of that date. The prohibition has adversely affected importers who ordered or purchased consignments before the prohibition, which arrived or will arrive in Jamaica after the prohibition was in effect. The government, clearly, Mr. President, I have had many discussions with Minister Samuda then, now MP Samuda, Minister Vaz, and others in the government. The government recognized, and of course people in the private sector, the businesses who are affected, we recognize the need to facilitate trade within Jamaica, while at the same time safeguarding human health and the environment from the adverse impact of plastics. To address this issue, it was proposed that Section 8 of the Act be amended to empower the minister to make orders having retrospective effect. The bill, therefore, Mr. President, seeks to amend the Section 8 of the Act to provide for such orders to remove consequences of the prescribed absolute prohibition for imported consignments of goods ordered or purchased prior to the effective date of the prescribed prohibition under Section 8.1a of the Act, which arrived in Jamaica on or after the effective date of the prohibition. The bill, clause-by-clause analysis, short title and construction. The clause provides for the the short title of the Act and directs that the Act should be read in conjunction with the Trade Act. And the Trade Act, the reason why I'm here, Mr. President, and not the ministry which originated this, is because the Trade Act resides in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Clause 2, amendment of the Section 8 of the Principal Act. The clause provides for the insertion of new subsections 4, 5, and 6, which provide for the following. 1. Subsection 4 provides that where an order was made providing for an absolute prohibition on the importation of goods pursuant to subsection 1A, the minister may by order specify that the consignments be treated in the same manner as goods imported prior to the effective date of such prohibition if the minister is satisfied of the matter in subsection 5. Number 2, subsection 5 provides that the matter to which the minister must be satisfied is that the relevant prohibited goods were ordered or purchased prior to the effective date of the prohibition. Sub 3, Mr. President, subsection 6 provides that no criminal liability shall be imputed in respect of goods that are subject to an order made under subsection 4. The inclusion of these clauses allows the minister to facilitate importers who have ordered or purchased consignments prior to the effective date of the prohibition order to import these goods without consequence. It should be noted that the Trade Plastic Materials Prohibition Amendment Order 2024 also provides that the distribution of plastic food containers should terminate on the 9th day of January 2025. As such, in the exercise of this discretion, the minister will be guided by this timeline. We're looking at a timeline in early January 2025. The phased approach as it relates to the ban on single-use plastics has been successful, and as such, Mr. President, we anticipate the same in this regard. Memorandum of Objects and Reasons. The memorandum stipulates that the key objective of the Act as stated above. And, Mr. President, if it pleases you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Hill, for that very pellucid explanation. Senator Fraser-Vins, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I assure you and my colleagues that my intervention will even be shorter than Senator Hill's. I do believe so. Minister, let me just start off by saying I can understand the reason why you're seeking to make the amendment. I do recall having conversations with Minister Samuda about this provision, well, about the intent to impose the ban, and subsequent to that, calling for an extension so that all the companies who trade in this area, and certainly those who will be impacted, will have sufficient time to prepare themselves. Admittedly, some concession was made and the order was brought into effect in July of this year. The thing that puzzles me, though, Minister, is that when one looks at the order, there are 3 specific activities that will be impacted. One that took effect on the 11th of July this year, and that has to do with the importation of plastic food containers. There's another which will take effect in January 2025 that has to do, again, with food containers, but this time the distribution. And then there's one in July 2025, which you're aware, which has to do with personal care products. So consequent upon that, I am seeking to understand, because it is not stated here in the bill, which of these 3 activities that you're seeking the extension for, or you're seeking to have the amendment for.
in my mind's eye, it would stand to reason that it has to be the one that took effect the 11th of July, 2024. And if my conclusion is correct, then I want to understand why we are going the route of amending the act and not an order. Because it seems to me that an order would have been the most effective route for two reasons. One, you can accomplish the same thing by giving the extension, if that is what is being sought, because essentially that's what it boils down to. Persons have purchased material or plastic containers and they need to bring it into Jamaica, but they can't because of the ban. And if that is the case, then an order ostensibly changing the date from the 11th of July 2024 to the 1st of January 2025 would not just treat with the one or the two persons who have indicated that concern, but also allow for persons dealing in the sector as a whole to ensure they put everything in order that is required pursuant to the ban. So that's the first thing. The second thing as well, which I believe an order would be better in the instance case, is because when you amend the Trade Act, essentially what you're doing is you are giving to the minister a wide power, which is not limited to the ban on plastic containers or plastic bags, but from my reading can be used for other matters or other items that will be banned as we learn more and more about harmful chemicals or harmful materials that are being used in some of the things that we consume. And what I'm afraid of, Minister, is that any minister who has that power can use it in a way that is counterproductive to the aim and the intent of the ban. And I am anxious that based on how we have operated over time, that the lack of confidence in how this power is going to be used give me some anxiety. Let me put it that way. And to ensure that we meet the objective, because this is not just a Jamaica initiative. This is an initiative that is taking place across the world, and you would have been aware of the discussion taking place in terms of the plastic treaty. So this is not limited to Jamaica. And because of that, I believe if my conclusion that the aim is to treat with the July 11, 2024 ban, then the better approach would be to amend the order or a new order. The second thing is, if it is that the government feels that they should amend the act, I wondered whether any consideration was given to making this provision a sunset clause. Again, it allows us to achieve the objective of keeping plastic containers and plastics out of our country. And the sunset legislation will be for a particular time, as you know, and it achieves the objective of the government, but also achieves the objective of the country, which is to keep plastic out. So I'm recommending that in the event that you choose not to amend the order, for reasons I'm quite sure you will share, that you will consider a sunset legislation. And final thing, which is not stipulated in this the bill before us, and I did not see it in the trade because there's no such provision in the Trade Act, is the procedure that one would have to undertake to get this waiver by the minister. Ostensibly, I believe that an application has to be made with the supporting documents, but it is not stated here. And whether there is any other consideration to be given by the government outside of the fact that the order was made prior to the date of the ban. which is the 14th of July. And finally, Minister, if you could state for me how many persons, because you are the Minister of Trade, so I'm hopeful that you have that information. If you could just share with us how many persons, meaning natural and individuals, who have challenges in this regard pursuant to the July 11, 2024 ban. So that's the number of persons, company, individuals who have been affected because of the July 11, 2024 ban. So with that, Minister, I am asking you to consider the proposal of an order as opposed to amending the legislation. But if you choose to go the way of the amendment to the legislation, that perhaps consideration be given to making it a sunset clause specific to the July 11 ban. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Minister?
Senator Fraser-Binns, thank you very much. There are two parts, there are two issues that you raise that have to be considered. One is that we have a fait accompli to deal with in that goods are on the wharf. The issue is once it's on the wharf, you either clear it or it's destroyed. Okay? Now, the law, the act does not allow the minister to deal with that retrospective aspect of the reality. The reality is that they exist. Okay? So in order to make an order that as such as you're suggesting, the act has to be changed, which is one item that deals with the past. The number, remember, and I need to explain to you that there are three ministries involved in this. MEGJEC, where it originates. MMIC, my ministry, that has the responsibility to facilitate, which is what we're doing, to get the act in place, because the people went to MEGJEC first, not to my ministry, and then customs rules over the Jamaica finance rules over the Jamaica Customs Agency. So you have three ministries. Part of what you fear then, that it might, something might have me have three ministries involved. So it's not just one person, because the act reads that the minister will by order, but in practice, it will be at least three ministries involved. The number of people, I can't tell you. I know that there are at least 2 or 3 that I know of, and there are 2 others in a different area that deals with that kind of matter that actually comes out of MEGJEC, and the Prime Minister has made, because his authority under the law that governs that issue in MEGJEC allows him to make an order. So his order has been made. This, we have to change the law. The part about the future and the fact that you would want a sunset date, I want to address. Because being in business and living all my life in a regulated industry, which banking is, you cannot make, you raise a good point. You said, look, there are other things that this law may have to cover that we don't now know. Precisely. We don't now know what next month. Next month, we get a study from somewhere that shows that a particular product, most likely plastic, most likely hydrocarbon related, will have to be banned. Since we know that this happens now, they're again dealing with the same thing that I mentioned with Senator Brown with the FSC Act. People will have to be given a measure of discretion, but because you have 3 ministries involved, and therefore 3 different sets of bureaucrats, not to mention lawyers and the people, the importing people. I believe that there's enough safeguard there that you can leave a measure of room to say, look, an order has, MEGJEC comes to me and says, look, sends us a letter and said, this has to happen, an order has to be given, they investigate, we check with whoever we must check to, and all this has gone through the OPC and the AG, every single step. Just everything. So if there's no law and no confidentiality banning it, of course. So I'll check with my technical people and the lawyers and see. I mean, this is business. We want everybody who has to deal with this to know that the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, this government is very open and willing to deal with an issue that you may have. Bring it to us, we try to find a solution. That's what we do. So I'm going to say to you, Senator Fraser-Binns, that we have looked at this very carefully. In fact, as you know, because you've talked to MP Samuda, he talks to me on a regular basis, many times in a week, to get this through. But we had to go through the process that we have through the AGC and the OPC and everybody else who we must go through to make sure we make it right. I think we've done the proper due diligence. I think the risk that you raise is properly mitigated. 3 ministries are going to check, 3 different sets of people, and if it's an issue that's an order that has to be made out of line, has to go back to the AGC. So, and we will look at that. But I recommend, Mr. President, that this be approved as it is.
So Minister is asking for the second reading. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Mr. Clark?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Trade Act, read a second time.
Thank you. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you, Marshall. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Sorry. Senator Fraser.
I had asked Minister if he could just share with me what is the process. You notice that you mentioned, that you are aware of 2 or 3 companies, but seeing that this is going to be something that is available for persons within the limits of the law, if you could just share with us the process so other persons may also be aware in case it's a benefit they can derive.
You can stay seated, Minister.
How this came about, it was initiated by another ministry, as I mentioned, MEGJEC, and that's where, because that's where Minister Samuda was, and that's where the matter still will reside. If a situation like this happens, a request would come to us. We would imagine, after it was properly investigated, that has nothing to do with our investigation. We would investigate and then we would check with finance because...
Sorry, an application for the exercise that the ministerial jurisdiction would come originally to MEGJEC.
Yes, would come from MEGJEC. And then to us, we would then investigate, and that investigation will invariably include the Ministry of Finance and very likely the AGC if it's a tall or touchy issue.
Application is made to MJEC.
As it is now, will the law, my technical team, the law would, that would still be the process.
With the Minister of Trade.
MEGJEC, us, and then we decide. Okay, because we are the facilitating ministry, not the originating ministry.
Sorry,
I will have to sign it.
Your minister that signs the waiver.
Yes, yes.
Those in favor, clause 1? Against? Clause 2 and clause 2, those in favor? Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? I do report committees. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister is asking for the bill to be read a third time.
Mr. President, Mr. President, that's easy. Mr. President, I move for it.
Thank you very much. The question is that the bill be read for a third time.
Of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? Mr. Clark?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Trade Act read a third time and passed.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is not anticipated to do any further business today, save that the minister with responsibility for youth would wish to make a motion, or rather,
An intervention.
make
Thank
an
you.
intervention on the notice of motion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Members would have noted that the minister has risen to her feet to make a brief intervention. And I believe that Senator Gabriela Morris will respond.
Thank you very much,
Briefly
Mr.
too.
President. And I'll be just as brief as my colleague usually is on that side. So, Mr. President, today marks the beginning of National Parent Month and National Youth Month. And before I begin, I also want to express condolences to the parents and family of young Rashad, who lost his life earlier this week. And yesterday I visited Campion College and participated in their morning devotion. And I was able to speak with the leadership of the school and some of the students and to sign the book of tributes to Rashad Richards. And the sadness there was great, as we would have expected. He was very special. I was told he had a 4.0 GPA.
Wow.
That is brilliance. And there are many other brilliant children in our midst, and we want to ensure that they are able to reach their full potential. And so again, I express my condolences to his parents and to the entire Campion family that is grieving at this point. And we commit as a Ministry of Education to do everything we can to make sure that we do not have to be expressing condolences in this manner again. And it is only fitting, Mr. President, going back to the 2 days that we're honoring, the month that we're celebrating this particular month of November, it is only fitting that these two stakeholders are recognized and celebrated in the same month. The dual observance highlights the government's and the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information's dedication to fostering robust connections between parents and youth, promoting collaboration, resilience, growth among communities, and most importantly, their continued development. Mr. President, National Parent Month was inaugurated today, and the launch was organized by the National Parenting Support Commission under the theme Surf Beyond the Surface. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to participate because I'm here in the Senate, but I still wanted to speak to it. The theme for National Parents Month, Surf Beyond the Surface, was crafted with the aim to empower parents and guardians to embrace the responsible integration of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, into their parenting approaches. The theme is anchored by 3 guiding pillars for 2024. Click, get with it, connect, go with it, and collaborate, grow with it. And so the digital future, Mr. President, is here. We see and experience it every day, and our parents are experiencing it every day. And we have to give our parents the tools to assist our children in navigating this new digital world. And that's really what the theme is about, how we empower parents within this digital world as parents, and also to help to support their children. And up to, it's very fitting for me, and I found the theme very lovely, because up to Wednesday at 10:06 a.m., I had responsibility for digital transformation. And it remains at the office of the Prime Minister. But it is showing the integration of the whole issue of digital future and our digital future across all our ministries and agencies. Mr. President, I'm also pleased to say that the Youth and Adolescent Policy Division of the Ministry will officially launch National Youth Month activities tomorrow, November 2, with a church service at the Port Maria Seventh-day Adventist Church. Celebrated under the theme Youth Impact 2024, this year's Youth Month aims to inspire action among young people to focus on the meaningful influence and contributions they can make in their communities. And so if we look at some of what we're emphasizing is really a lot of the work that the administration has done for our young people, and we will be emphasizing that. So for those young people who are listening, we have built a stable economy for you. We have brought down the unemployment rate for you. We have removed education fees for you. We have removed guarantor requirements for student loans for you. We have eliminated fees at Heart NSTA Trust for you. We are setting aside agricultural land for you. We have set aside housing solutions for you. Every single NHT development, there are set aside particular benefits for those who are under 35 years old. And we don't talk about that a lot. So we are building a new Jamaica for young people. And this government, we believe, has been very youth-friendly and probably the most youth-friendly in our history. And it is only fitting that we are led by Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, a very young and energetic leader who believes in youth and has said that this is very important and that the youth are central to what we're doing. And so quickly, Mr. President, the areas of focus, and these have been created by our young people working with the ministry. They'll be focusing on promoting digital literacy and gender parity in a fast evolving tech savvy world. Too often when we see those who are in tech, they're mainly male. And so it is important that gender parity be looked at in relation to the future, which obviously a lot of that rests on digital and technology. Also advocating for health and well-being among youth, encouraging healthy lifestyle choices, providing world-class entrepreneurship training, and empowering them to participate in decision-making processes like the Youth Parliament, which we will have coming up later this month. The calendar of activities is being circulated so everyone can know what's happening, and we encourage everyone here to participate as best as possible. So this month-long observance is really critical, and it will strengthen our interface with our young people in Jamaica and strengthen the bonds between generations. And before I close, Mr. President, I'd like to thank my predecessor, the Honorable Favour Williams, for her stewardship of the Ministry of Education and Youth. These programs I just pointed out would have been drafted under her leadership. And I would also, I can't not acknowledge and recognize Minister Williams for her historic appointment as Jamaica's first woman Minister of Finance. And I am so happy to be able to say that. And so I want the youth and the parents of Jamaica to know that, and of course, this is our Prime Minister and his commitment to women and elevating women in this manner. And I want the youth and parents of Jamaica in closing to know that as your new Minister of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, I'm looking forward to working with you and all other education stakeholders to build a peaceful, productive, and prosperous Jamaica for all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Gabriela Morris, I recognize you from a seat other than your own.
President, I want to join in also acknowledging both Youth and Parenting Month. And I want to add my vote of congratulations to you, Minister, on your elevation. I trust that you will do everything in your power to ensure that you prioritize the needs of course, that you prioritize the needs of the youth of this country. I also want to express condolences, Mr. President, to the family of Rashid Richards, who unfortunately lost his life, student from Campion College. His family is actually from Northwest St. Anne, and so the community is going through that process of grieving, and so we want to extend our deepest condolences. Mr. President, Youth Month, I'll tackle that one first. Youth Month is always about us celebrating and centering the spotlight on our young people of this country, their challenges, their achievements, their hopes and dreams. And it requires us as well to look critically at where we are. This year, many young people, especially, Mr. President, I think were surprised to learn of the fact that we are not fully on track to meet the targets of Vision 2030. And my generation, I think many people were surprised because of how we had looked forward to meeting those targets. And so it calls into sharp focus the need for us to recenter and to look at some of the priorities, especially the ones that concern our youth and our education system. And we've spoken this morning about some of them: education and the educational outcomes, how we make our schools safer places for our young people. Youth and civic participation is something that we have to improve on if we want to build a future where our young people are more involved and are decision makers and are actually involved in the process of development in this country. Entrepreneurship is something that we have to continue to encourage. Many of our young people are finding that the formalized system of work might not be the best fit for them. And it's interesting that many of them are moving towards entrepreneurship. It must be an imperative for any government to prioritize supporting young entrepreneurs. We have to look as well at social protection for our young people. Housing is an issue that continues to be at the forefront for many young people in this country. And while, Minister, there have been provisions for a while now for young people under the age of 35, many of them still face significant challenges in accessing homes and in actually participating because of the high cost. So it is still out of reach for many of our young people. And so this is something that we have to prioritize to ensure that our young people can not just live here, but actually thrive here. And so while during Youth Month, there's a lot of talk about what youth need and where we need to go, I'm hoping that we can see some action on some of these things that are very important to us moving forward. So I'm looking forward to that. On the note of, and I will also add, Mr. President, that we know that youth are not a homogeneous group. And so we have to look at how we deal with various groupings of young people. Rural youth, it's a group that needs attention. Many of our young people are calling out and reminding us that Kingston is not Jamaica. And we have started that effort of encouraging young farmers, young agriculturalists, and I believe that we have to take it a step further to look more critically at some of the challenges that are being faced by young people in rural Jamaica. Youth with disabilities. We have to make it easier for young people with disabilities to thrive in this country. And so we have to take a greater look at education and how we support them there. And even outside of the formal schooling system, how we actually help them to become productive citizens in this country is something that we will have to advance. Parenting Month. Now, I note the theme, Minister, surf beyond the surface. And I believe that it is commendable that we are looking at innovation and technology and how our parents can become more equipped to support students, because that is the landscape with which we're engaging, a landscape of technology and artificial intelligence. And so I believe that it's important to get parents involved in raising their children and in supporting their educational pursuits. So I believe that it is a good venture. However, I want to also add that about 2 years ago, I think during Youth Month as well, we spoke about the issue of parenting support and education. And I would love for us to refocus on that area, because what we're seeing now, especially as we hear the calls every day, Minister, for more families or more mothers and fathers to consider having children, is that the pushback is that where is the support for us to embark on this journey of parenthood? And so it is something that we must also begin to consider, that as we encourage persons to have children, we must also support them as they become parents. And so I want to put squarely on the table that while we equip our parents with the skills to support children, we also have to look at frank conversations and actions around supporting our parents, especially new mothers. We're seeing a lot of new mothers, and healthcare professionals have said it, that we're seeing postpartum depression, which is something that impacts the parenting process. And so mental health support, Senator Longmore, I believe you will agree with me, is completely necessary for new parents, and it is something that we have to prioritize at this stage. Additionally, when we look at path, you know, I went on a walk one day, and a parent was relaying to me that, you know, it's difficult for some families to get on path because there are certain requirements, and I won't spell them all out here, that are prohibitory. And while they would like to do a better job as parents of supporting their children, they need some help. And so I believe that if we're going to see more families growing and developing, we have to create that social support system. Now, PATH is there. It's a project that benefits thousands of Jamaicans. But I believe that we need to revisit the requirements and the support that is given on the path so that we can see more families getting the support that they so desperately need. And so, Mr. President, I want to close by saying cheers to the parents who, despite the challenges and despite sometimes the lack of resources, they do their best at ensuring that they give their children the support that they need to grow and thrive. And so I want to say cheers to them today. I also want to say cheers to the young people of this country who continue to be creative, who continue to show the energy that is so characteristic of Jamaicans, who continue to play their part in ensuring that as a nation, we move forward. And it is imperative that we, as leaders in this country, do our best to do right by them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both Senator Minister Morris Dixon and Senator Gabriel Morris. The question is that...
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I close with the question, I also just want to add a brief international perspective to the interventions made earlier, because the truth is that our young people should not only be celebrated for their activity and innovation here, but our young people have, with the support of the government, been engaging more and more internationally. And this is something to celebrate because they have really been holding our flag high. So apart from intentional actions like creating the Global Jamaica Diaspora Youth Council, which is really continuing to work at bringing more young people of second and third generation diaspora into the space of connecting with Jamaica and supporting more young people to connect with innovative programs like Grace Kennedy Foundation's Birthright program that brings them here for internships. When they experience Jamaica, they go back, they connect other colleagues at their universities or young entrepreneurs to come together. As well as, of course, engaging with our National Youth Advisory Council, which was one of the innovations that this administration created in 2017 to allow young people from across the island to apply to be advisors, essentially, to the government on issues, not only youth issues traditionally so defined, but youth perspectives on policy across the piece. And this has been phenomenal in getting young people to engage across the piece, across different ministries, and we continue to improve on engagement with young people through this body across ministries, including mine, which we always try to bring people in. When Senator Morris mentioned surprise at SDGs, I am fascinated at how young people are on top of understanding what our future needs to be like. So when we started to work towards the Summit of the Future, the Prime Minister, as you would well know, had been invited by the Secretary General to be one of the SDG stimulus leaders, and in fact, to be one of the co-chairs of 12 heads of government and heads of state who are charged with advocating internationally for getting our SDGs back on track. This is because Jamaica is doing far better than the global average, which we know is 17%. The global average is 17% of SDGs on track. And Jamaica is closer to 60. We're number one in the Caribbean. So maybe this is why young people are surprised, because they feel hopeful and optimistic, and they're aware that we do have systems in place. Everybody was pushed back by COVID, but we had such a well-developed program aligned with our National Development Plan, Agenda 2030, our Vision 2030, and Agenda 2030 are well aligned. So this is not to say that we don't have a big path to trod. There are a lot of things to get done, but the optimism is there, and our young people are on top of it. In fact, they're the drivers, which is so amazing. When we had the tertiary students, the secondary students, the young NGOs together, consulting with the UN as we work towards the Summit of the Future, it was incredible, the views that they had about how we can do better as a country and what they want to see in the future. And I mentioned this because I always have a concern that when we speak about months, that we really are focused on a month of activities that don't spill out into the year. But I think when you look at the track record of this administration, we're quite clear that the actions, only a few of which were listed by the minister, in terms of removing the guarantor requirement, in terms of removing all the tuition and administration fees at heart, in terms of, I think you didn't even mention the DBJ Biggie program that allows for seed funding for young entrepreneurs. That's a massive program, well used, our rural youth. Our Ministry of Agriculture has developed innovative programs to bring them into organics. CASE is expanded, Ebony Park is expanded, providing new business opportunities for young farmers. And if you had gone to Denby on the reduced day, you would have seen the young people there and present. They are not only tomorrow, they are today. And we're working with them throughout the years. So, Mr. President, I just wanted to say these few words as we ask for... Oh, okay. No, well, I was going to wrap, but I will just go a little longer since it's going to be a full debate, because there are certainly other things that I can talk about as well. I want to also, I just wanted to supplement and give the international aspect though, Mr. President, because the truth is, the truth is that our young people really do very well, not only for us here, but overseas. And I think recognizing that interplay between how it is that we are perceived overseas and how important our young people are to raising that the Jamaican flag and holding it high is really something of which we can be proud throughout the year, even as we concentrate on them during Youth Month. So thank you for the intervention, Mr. President, and I will take the question that you will pose when you pose it.
Thank you, Minister Johnson-Smith. Senator Brown.
National Youth Month, something that I've been celebrating from when I was a teenager. It's not new. National Parenting Month, not really new. But having listened to all the rosy statements from the government, I wonder why the polls are showing what it's showing. May it please you, Mr. President, a good note to...
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Senate, the question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. The question is that the Senate be the question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Just to point out that although the canteen downstairs looks to me to be almost ready for us, and I would advise you to go and have a look at it when you get a chance. We're still next door having lunch for today at least, and maybe one more week. So the question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Has been agreed. The Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. Thank you very much.